Good morning, everybody. This is Emily Stock with the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation. We'll be getting started with our draft statewide rail plan stakeholder meeting in just a minute. Thanks for joining us this morning. Okay, it is 9 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Again, this is Emily Stock with the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation. Thanks for joining us this morning. This is a stakeholder meeting for the draft statewide rail plan, and I am Chief of Rail Transportation for DRPT, and I'm going to be showing some slides this morning. The presentation is going to be about 45 minutes long. And we also have a public meeting this evening at 6 o'clock. I'm showing the same slides now that I'll be showing tonight, but this is a preview for our stakeholders. There will be Q&A at the end of the slide presentation, and that'll be about 15 minutes. Whatever we don't get to, we can certainly address on the rail plan website later on. And I am going to be turning things over to Bridget Wagner, who is our GIS lead for the statewide rail plan at 2 periods during the presentation, so that she can walk us through some of the story maps. So with that, I'm going to turn my camera off so you can focus on the slides that we put together and go through the presentation. So I'll show this slide again later on when we get to Q&A. So we're going to be using the question function of the GoToWebinar application when we get to that point. So here is our agenda for this morning, and we're going to. So the purpose of this meeting is to introduce the draft rail plan and to help people navigate through the plan and review it, and to allow folks to give some feedback. The draft will be available for review and comment for 30 days, and the final will be available in November. So the agenda for today, we're going to talk about some of the data that we've collected since the last statewide rail plan. We'll talk about nationwide rail trends, and about how Virginia's been an industry leader as trends happen nationwide. And then we also will talk about lessons learned, what we've heard through our outreach activities during the development of the rail plan. We'll talk about goals and policies. We will present freight and passenger rail projects and project benefits, and I'll also go through how to use the plan, and next steps and question and answer. Okay, then I am advancing to the next slide. Somehow I turned on my camera again. Hello. Okay. All right, so the statewide rail plan purpose and update. So this is the reason that we're doing the rail plan, and some of the basic information. We have developed this so that it aligns with the goals and objectives of VTRANS, our statewide multimodal long-range plan. And we also had our last rail plan 4 years ago. It was approved in 2018 by the Commonwealth Transportation Board and FRA, the Federal Railroad Administration. And FRA requires that we update a rail plan every 4 years. It's necessary to apply for and receive federal rail funding for passenger and freight projects. So that means more now than ever, given the infrastructure funding opportunities that are brought about by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA, and that program has $102 billion in rail funding from the federal government. So we certainly want to take advantage of that and have a rail plan that reflects that. The rail plan includes a short-term list of projects and a long-term list of projects. The short-term list of projects matches up with our 6-year improvement program for rail. We also include data points and metrics that can be compared from plan to plan and state to state. So we follow the FRA guidelines in how the plan was produced in the format for the plan, chapter by chapter. And of course, we do close coordination with our partner agency, Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, or VPRA, which I'll be talking about in a little bit. And we do have a new format for this rail plan. We have all the required text and data that FRA has in their guidelines, but we also are showing things through an interactive data and graphics view called a StoryMap. And as I mentioned, Bridget will walk you through that soon, and it'll display the rail plan more like a website rather than a static document or printable volume. So first I'm going to jump into Virginia's top 10 rail highlights since the last rail plan came out. And these are highlights as a result of DRPT programs. That's the first 4 here are as a result of DRPT rail programs. We've added 21 rail sidings for industry. We have improved 2.5 thousand miles of rail. We have generated 13 million carloads, rail carloads, and 44 million trucks have been diverted from Virginia's highways as a result of our programs. And the programs include the Rail Industrial Access Fund, which is an economic development program that builds spurs for industry, or a partnership that builds spurs for industry that is growing in Virginia. We also have the Rail Preservation Program that helps with state of good repair for short line railroads that provide last mile connections for Virginia industries. And we also have the Freight Program, which funds larger projects at the port and with Class 1 railroads like CSX and Norfolk Southern. So some more highlights since the last rail plan. The theme of this one is what's happening on the railroad. And one of the items to highlight is the freight tonnage reported. We've gone down in the amount of freight tonnage on Virginia's railroads since 2018, and much of this is because of coal's weight compared to other commodities and intermodal containers. So it's gone down from about 151 million tons to 132 million tons. And that's a trend that's reflected around the country, not just in Virginia. And our track miles, I'm highlighting track miles because we have a new mechanism for calculating track miles. Before we calculated route miles, which is how many miles of rail in Virginia, kind of like highway miles. But track miles are more like lane miles if you compare it to highways. So that encompasses everything, including double tracks and yard tracks and that sort of thing. So we have almost 6,000 track miles in Virginia, and this calculation is made possible by the GIS digitization effort that we've taken on since the last rail plan. But the route miles in Virginia have remained about the same, about 3,000 miles. Abandoned rail miles, there are more abandoned rail miles since the last rail plan, up to 97 abandoned rail miles, and that's a trend that's also continuing as railroads streamline operations. So a few other trends. The theme of this is public sector investment, and as a result of public sector investment in rail, the Commonwealth now owns 413 miles of rail right-of-way, and we did not own any before. So this is a new development as a result of Transforming Rail in Virginia, the Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative, and the creation of the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. And VPRA is our sister agency, and it owns and develops passenger rail services. And if you haven't already, I encourage you to take a look at the Rail Authority's website, and that is virginiapassengerrailauthority.org. It's a new agency that was formed to work with Amtrak and Virginia Railway Express, which is VRE, our commuter rail operator in Northern Virginia, to develop passenger rail and support passenger rail in Virginia. So that's an exciting development. We also have applied for and gotten quite a few federal grants as of, since the last rail plan. Over $176 million has been awarded to the Commonwealth for rail projects. 7 projects are awarded, and we have 6 applications that are pending right now with FRA. And we have an exciting new program. We're actually going to add 2 new applications to the list in early October through the FRA's Rail Crossing Elimination Program. And we're also in the process of working on a consolidated rail infrastructure safety improvement program grant through FRA for improvements to the Buckingham Branch Railroad. So that's coming in November. We also, as a result of all of this work, we have more money invested in rail as reflected in our rail plan. So the last rail plan had about $3.9 billion for rail investments in the short and long term. This rail plan has $5.8 billion in short and long term investments. So we're definitely putting more emphasis on rail. So for the next slide, I'm going to turn things over to Bridget Wagner, who, as I mentioned before, served as the rail plan's GIS lead, and she's with HDR. She's going to do 2 quick demonstrations about our rail plan's interactive story maps. This is a new way to display data updates. So I'm going to turn things over to Bridget.
All right, thank you. I'm going to try and make sure I'm showing my screen. Okay, perfect. So everyone can see my screen?
Yes, you're good.
I'll take that as yes, thank you. So as Emily said, this first dashboard, these dashboards are the critical components of this digital state rail plan story map. And this first view that you're seeing here is that Virginia statewide rail infrastructure overview. So instead of traditional tables and charts, given our abilities with GIS over the years to develop the comprehensive statewide database, we do have this interactive dashboard. So at the center of it, you're seeing the map here, and this is showing the entire rail network, and the coloring is showing by type of rail. So you can see that in this donut chart on the left-hand side, and you can also expand this legend up on the right here to really see what each of those features are. Within the map itself, you do have the ability to zoom in, pan around, go in so far as to actually see granular yard detail, and you'll see that the chart on the left-hand side is dynamically interacting with your map view, both in terms of mileage and rail type. Additionally, you can click on rail features within the map and see all of the attribute information associated with each of the rail segments. So that can range from locality, district, subdivision, as well as applicable trackage rights, yard names, max weight, clearance, and so on. You also have the ability within this dashboard to change the base map. And I would say this is a differentiator in being able to really explore rail data. And the fact that, you could zoom into an exact location, you could type in a location of interest, and it will take you right to that area in the map. And then you can see the latest and greatest imagery and really be able to drill down to what your area of interest is. This chart also, this donut chart interacts dynamically with the map, so you could filter out just yards. The same thing with just main line. And you can also use this table below. So the real goal of this dashboard is to allow for several access points to the same type of data, whether you prefer to be in the map, in the table, or looking at the chart breakdown. Last but not least are these filters at the top. So again, another access point to really filter and query exactly what you'd like to see. So that includes rail type, rail owner, operator, locality, VDOT district, or even state-supported route. So again, the functionality, we're trying to increase, the interactive and dynamic ability of this map as much as possible, and that is the goal of this part of the dashboard. In the same view, you can click on this button to the right to access the rail crossings. And again, you're having a similar approach to how you can interact with the data. Given that the crossing data is large and it takes up a lot of the map, this is why it has a dedicated dashboard. To state here, all of this crossing data is pulled directly from the FRA. So all of the data is streamed from that FRA crossing inventory database. The difference here is that in the FRA safety map, if any of you have seen that before, you can really just view the point locations. Here, we're really enhancing, kind of elevating that FRA data by allowing you to query. You weren't necessarily able to query spatially in the FRA site, but here you can. So in the first section, you can query by type, by clicking on the charts, or even by using these filters above, very similar to the previous dashboard you saw. You could also look by crossing position. I know we know that's a very important aspect of at grade, under, or over. So the same thing is available here. If you click on the donut, it also filters the map, it filters the table. The same would apply, again, if you use any of the filters at the top. And last but not least, being able to go by land use. So again, a lot of comprehensive data with this crossing information, and really being able to apply those same kind of quick filters. And filter the table and filter the map. The same functionality also applies here, where you could zoom all the way into a crossing location, and you'd have that opportunity yet again to change to an aerial view and better understand the proximity and surrounding elements of each crossing location. That is a very quick overview of these dashboards that will be accessible, just as I showed here within the StoryMap.
Thank you, Bridget.
You're welcome.
I will turn things back over to you again soon to show us the project dashboards. And let's see, hopefully you all can see my screen again. There we go. So next, I'll talk about national rail trends. There are really three big ones. Number one is the labor shortage that we're hearing about that resulted in a narrowly averted rail strike just recently within the last few weeks, and also the supply chain crisis that really came to a head in December and January this past winter. We also are seeing a trend of longer train lengths as a result of coal decreasing, and intermodal and manifest freight are combined into one train, and precision railroading is part of that. That's something that the Class 1 railroads are undertaking. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic kept people at home, not riding the train, and some services were cut during that time due to uncertainty. The next slide here is about how Virginia's rail industry has responded. Virginia has definitely risen to the occasion. First off, passenger and freight trends and data in Virginia. I'm kind of reporting them together here, emphasizing the interconnectedness of the whole rail network in Virginia, because we are still on shared tracks between freight and passenger. And so improvements to the passenger rail network and the freight rail network actually benefit both networks. So a rising tide lifts all boats. And there have been positive headlines for freight improvements, positioning the Port of Virginia to pick up the slack from West Coast ports through the supply chain crisis. And there are opportunities for a more permanent solution going forward. There is a story that Norfolk Southern actually inked a deal with Hapag-Lloyd to take more goods by rail to the Midwest. And it helps that the port in Virginia carries about 35% of its goods in and out by rail. It really leads the pack as far as ports on the East Coast for the percentage of rail that's used. And with regard to ridership and the COVID-19 pandemic in Virginia, our state-sponsored services are up to about 90% of their pre-pandemic ridership as of the spring. And part of how we did this in Virginia, the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority that I mentioned before is dedicated to making state-sponsored service the best it can be, and decisions on when to reintroduce service that was cut during the pandemic and when to add service is based on demand, and they're really able to pay attention to that and make sure that they're responding to customers appropriately. So statewide rail plan and public outreach. We've been doing public outreach since last spring on the statewide rail plan. It's a long process to get all this data together and get feedback. So in addition to today's virtual public meeting, we had our website launch back in the spring of 2021. We have had a couple of surveys and a virtual meeting for stakeholders and for the public. And I want to highlight in July 2021, the Commonwealth Corridor Public Outreach Survey. So last summer, DRPT was charged with completing 3 General Assembly studies at the same time that the state rail plan was under development. And we were looking at potential passenger rail for Bristol, for the town of Bedford, and for the East-West Commonwealth Corridor. And the outreach on the Commonwealth Corridor study helped us determine the route for the Commonwealth Corridor from Hampton Roads through Richmond and Charlottesville, Lynchburg, Roanoke, and the New River Valley. And so we were able to determine what the potential ridership might be for that and some very high-level cost estimates for that corridor. And throughout the process, starting in the spring of 2021, DRPT has presented to the Commonwealth Transportation Board's Rail and Transit Subcommittee on a regular basis. And we've heard a lot as we've been out and about, and here's a very basic summary of the comments, very high level. There's a more in-depth summary in Chapter 6. What we heard that people want to upgrade train schedules, not just build infrastructure for passenger rail, and that's with the purpose of improving freight and passenger rail reliability. Prioritize rail service investments to locations with the best multimodal connections and economic opportunities, to prioritize our projects that way. We heard that folks want us to identify strategies for rail that complement the multimodal freight network and present solutions to known problems like trucker shortages and port congestion. And we heard that we should be upgrading technology for at-grade crossings for safety and predictable wait times. And we also heard that past freight rail investments to serve the Port of Virginia are paying off. And for those of you all who are familiar, we invested in double stack clearance for CSX and Norfolk Southern to make the port more resilient during, and that made the port more resilient during the recent supply chain crisis. We actually were growing despite this crisis. So next I'll talk about our overarching transportation planning goals, and these come from VTrans, Virginia's multimodal transportation plan. Economic competitiveness and prosperity is at the top of that list. Accessible and connected places, safety for all users, proactive system management, and healthy communities and sustainable transportation communities. Those are all the goals that we reach for when we invest in rail projects in Virginia. So along with data, trends, and the input that we've received, the goals inform the policy framework and recommended projects. And the goals are also used to measure benefits for our rail projects that are covered in Chapter 5 of the rail plan. So this slide shows the steps that we take in rail planning. We were going through each one of these today. So we really started out with looking at data trends and all of those data points that FRA requires in its rail plan guidance. We looked to the public and to stakeholders for feedback on our current programs and what we can be doing. We look to VTrans and agency goals to make sure that our priorities are in line with those. And we've developed a program of projects based on that. And we also, as part of the rail plan, have projected benefits. So we did a benefit cost analysis as well that I'll talk about. And I do want to highlight the picture on the left-hand side here. This is, for those of you all who are familiar, you might notice this is the ACA Yard in Richmond, Virginia. And you'll see 195 at the bottom of the picture. Staples Mill Station is in the distance at the very top. And of course, Staples Mill Station is our busiest Amtrak station in the southeast. And DRPT partnered with CSX to build an eastern bypass around, a western bypass around ACA Yard that you'll see in the picture as well on the left-hand side. So next I'll talk about our policy framework. As VPRA, the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, was established, DRPT, the Department of Rail and Public Transportation, retained its role and to administer and set guidelines for freight rail grant programs and lead state planning for freight and passenger rail. So we are still the agency that performs the statewide rail plan. We still set the direction, so DRPT still sets the direction to plan for freight and passenger rail, and others implement those projects like the port and the railroads for the freight side, and VPRA and the Virginia Railway Express on the passenger side. So here are some high-level policy framework items for both freight and then passenger I'll cover next. So for our freight policy framework, we want to emphasize that that investment in the freight rail network should support rail transportation alternatives that complement the Virginia highway system and create economic opportunities. It's important to us that the freight network really be seen as a system, and one can't work without the other. There are a lot of last mile connections that can be made through short line railroads, but a lot of them are also made through truck. And in order to keep the highways uncongested, a freight rail network is important to relieve some of that congestion as well. So we want to prioritize, the second item is to prioritize the preservation of rail right-of-way for rail and transportation use, while facilitating proposals for co-located recreational uses as appropriate. We get more and more inquiries about rails to trails, rails with trails, but we also want to make sure that rail networks or rail lines that are being abandoned or that are underused are preserved for transportation use. That's the number one goal. And so we want to work with folks to find out if there are ways to keep rail in a state of good repair and serve customers on active rail right-of-way. We also work with freight railroads and other stakeholders to optimize existing freight rail infrastructure, so making sure that what's there is maintained. And we work with freight railroads and other stakeholders to increase rail mode share at critical freight bottlenecks, including the Port of Virginia. So our next slide is a policy framework focused on stations. Again, very high level, and the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, other partners really will be looking to this direction as they go through their planning and development. You may recall that the last rail plan had a rail station policy that was pretty prescriptive, and as funding and planning mechanisms have changed, we want to remain flexible. DRPT wants to remain flexible, recognizing that no two stations are alike, and that one size, one procedure does not necessarily fit all. Here are some general principles, though. Number one, we put an emphasis on multimodal connections. That has not changed. Stations are a gateway to communities and create opportunities for multimodal connections. So that includes passenger rail, intercity bus, transit, ride share, bike, and pedestrian access. We also have improvement priorities for stations now that the Commonwealth owns some of the Virginia stations and are responsible for bringing them up to ADA standards and a state of good repair. And we also will prioritize partnering with stakeholders to fund capacity improvements and new stations and other improvements which support multimodal access, equity, and a positive customer experience. And VPRA is looking at these at this policy framework as it prioritizes the development and funding plans for stations. We also recognize that planning for passenger rail stations should recognize that stations are regional transportation assets to serve unique community needs through community consensus within the multimodal transportation network. So again, one size definitely doesn't fit all. And with regard to location decisions, those should consider service levels that are appropriate to the population of the region, the existing stations within that region, and multimodal connectivity and statewide service planning goals. So that policy has not changed. And then with regard to funding partnerships, the Commonwealth will partner with regions to support a funding strategy for station needs that considers potential local, state, and federal funding plus appropriate match. So support could be in the form of technical assistance to pursue a federal grant or incremental funding subject to availability to close a project funding gap. And the strategy will help guide decisions by the Commonwealth for state funding. So we want to look at station elements holistically as a percentage of a whole, not necessarily drawing a line and itemizing funding responsibilities going forward. So we've talked about trends, feedback, goals, and a policy framework. Those are all elements that help us develop a program of passenger and freight investments in the short and long term. And here are some, just an overview of the recommended rail projects in our program. So we have 174 total projects, total planned investment of $5.8 billion, 93 freight projects, individual freight projects, 81 individual passenger rail projects. We have short-term investment and long-term investment in both freight and passenger. And those are broken up and shown on the slide here. Short-term investments are planned within 6 years. Those are reflected in our 6-year improvement program, and long-term investments are planned beyond 6 years. So I'm going to talk a little bit about passenger rail first. It's really dominated by the work that the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority is doing to advance transportation or transforming rail in Virginia. And transforming rail in Virginia is a multi-phase program, and it'll actually double the service, double the Amtrak service in Virginia. It'll provide hourly Amtrak service between Richmond and Washington, increase the Amtrak service to Roanoke, which has already started, and then extend Amtrak service to the New River Valley, which is expected in 2026. It will result in increased VRE service, commuter service along the I-95 corridor by 75%, with more service in the peak period and additional late night and weekend service. There'll be increased Amtrak service to Newport News and Norfolk, and it really lays the foundation to make the Southeast Rail Corridor possible with the acquisition of the currently out of service S-Line, which runs from Petersburg to North Carolina. And it'll preserve the existing freight corridor between Doswell and Clifton Forge for future east-west passenger service in the center of the state. And for more details, I encourage you to go to transformingrailvirginia.com and that has some information. It's part of the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority website. And next, I'll turn things back over to Bridget to do the interactive StoryMap demo that will take you through the project dashboard to explore all the projects in our plan, intercity passenger, commuter rail, and VRE in Northern Virginia, and then also freight projects. And I'll fill you in a little bit more on our freight projects after Bridget shows you the maps.
Perfect. Thanks, Emily. All right, let me make sure I have got it. Okay, great. So just to get started here, beginning with the VPRA project. So again, you're seeing a very similar layout to the dashboard you saw previously for the statewide rail and the crossing characteristics. In this view here, we are showing the entire system for these VPRA projects. You'll see that as I'm panning through the map, the expenditure totals are dynamically changing. So they're showing the totals right now at the bottom for the map extent, and they will, again, adjust based on map extent. So the same functionality applies here, where beginning with the map, you can zoom in and you can click on a segment, and it will actually identify the project extent here. So there are several projects in the VPRA list, as well as the other agencies, VRE, and then the freight projects that are statewide in nature. So in those events, we're covering all of the rail network, just to kind of apply that global reference. You'll see in the top right here in this pop-up that obviously there will be overlap in some areas that are statewide, in particular right-of-way transaction costs. So then you'll see capital improvements. So these are, again, those more general projects, but these pop-ups are providing you with the core breakdown of the project information, the applicant, type, district, and the allocations for short-term, long-term, previous expenses, and that total overall budget. So that is within just the map functionality. The right-hand side here, we have the actual list of projects. And again, really promoting different access points to get to the same type of data. So on the right-hand side here, we do have the projects alphabetically listed. So you can simply scroll through and click on the one that you're interested in. For example, clicking on this record will actually zoom you right into the project location, and it will provide that pop-up information. Again, in this map, as with the others, you can change that to imagery so that you can quickly zoom in and start to really drill down and see that rail segment information. So I'll just go back to a different map view. So the same now on the left-hand side, we have a breakdown by projects by grantee. So if you're zoomed out here, you can again click on this donut hole, and it will actually filter the map, filter the expenditures, and even the project list. So again, a quick way to filter out if there's a certain grantee that you'd like to focus in the dashboard. We also have projects by type. So these are the 3 types that were defined in the VPRA budget document. So again, projects can also be filtered out by single or multiple in this type donut chart as well. And similar to before, you can also filter up here and up here for type and grantee. This second link here will actually take you to VPRA's website and link you directly to their budget documentation, which is the source for all the information you see in the dashboard. So hopping over to VRE, this is the same exact type of layout where you're seeing the dashboard, and then that link again will take you to VRE's website for their budget documentation. This map is obviously a little bit more abbreviated given VRE's overall system, but the same approach. So you're seeing the total expenditures, the project list alphabetically listed here, the projects by type. These again are types that were defined in the VRE documentation, having the ability to click on the donut and it will filter the project list as well as the map. And then again, being able to use this filter at the top. So different access points for really getting to the query and the type of data that you'd like to see. And then hopping to the freight project, which I know Emily will add a bit more context on. So the overall map here is showing the coverage, linear coverage of these freight projects. We do have symbology for short, long-term in both. Obviously, there are some projects that are in the same segments that have, if they're both or short, there is symbology overlap. So it might look like everything here is short, but that is not the case. You can actually drill down into understanding that a bit more by using this filter in the top right. So if you use this filter, it'll not only filter the map, it will also filter this table, which you can click on items in this table, and they'll take you to that exact project location with that additional pop-up information. So the same would apply if you were to let's reset this, go to the home screen. Let's just select all. I want to make sure, I have to unclick here. You could also filter by district. So for example, if we just want to look at Hampton Roads, now you're seeing all the projects that are in the Hampton Roads VDOT district. So again, also including port information, just as reference to the freight rail project. Additionally, other than this map, you can also look at this breakdown of the chart right here, where you can quickly see the number of applicants and the count of those projects per applicant. So that is the overall dashboard, and I'll let Emily add more context here.
Thank you, Bridget. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about freight project highlights. I want to spend a little time talking about our support of the Port of Virginia as we experienced how well the Port of Virginia defied national trends and actually picked up business during the supply chain crisis. I want to highlight our continued support in this year's rail plan. So these are 3 projects that I pulled out, but in the background is that DRPT consistently supports growth at the Port of Virginia and contributed approximately $10 million annually between 2009 and 2020 through its Rail Enhancement Fund. Our new grant program is called DRPT's Freight Program, and it's committed close to $50 million in this rail plan for freight projects at the port. So we are supporting the Norfolk International Terminal's NIT Central Rail Yard expansion, the Commonwealth Railway Marshalling Yard, and also the Virginia Inland Port inside the gate improvements, and that's up in Front Royal, Virginia, in Northwest Virginia. So please go to the rail plan and the website for more information about these projects. I'm going to switch gears a little bit to talk about long-term freight projects, and we are working on a bold plan called, we're calling it right now, Transforming Freight in Virginia, to identify technology, equipment, infrastructure enhancements to maximize the capacity and efficiency of Virginia's transportation network, and focusing on moving that needle by increasing the percentage of goods moving in and out of the Port of Virginia by rail. We understand that diversification of freight movement really helps our ability to get goods in and out of the port efficiently, and so part of that may focus on a series of strategically located intermodal facilities, and we'll build upon location studies that are being done right now by the Port of Virginia and the Virginia Economic Development Partnership to do that. And we'll continue to work with industry on locations that are poised for freight rail growth. The map here on the right-hand side is a heat map that shows the locations in Virginia that have industrial development clusters that are close to rail, that rely on rail, and that we could build upon. So we want to build upon those existing efforts and meet our and look for some new funding opportunities for strategic development, possibly through the IIJA, in collaboration with the freight industry leaders and leveraging the power of freight rail to enhance economic development in the state. So in a nutshell, this initiative will bring together multiple agencies and private sector partners to deliver a program of projects from a systems perspective at strategic locations. And so you'll see when you go through the rail plan that those projects that really get us to this goal, that get us closer to transforming freight in Virginia and increasing the mode share for rail are identified in our project list. And then here is a slide about the program benefits. Those of you all who are on the phone are many of our partners and are familiar with the benefits of investing in rail. Just dollars and cents wise, $2 billion in annual benefits are estimated as a result of our freight rail projects, and $171 million in annual benefits are expected as a result of our passenger rail projects. And most of those benefits are derived from the savings of diverting freight and passengers from the highways to rail. This also includes congestion savings and crash reduction benefits. Of course, safety, shipping by rail avoids about 1.5 billion miles of truck travel in Virginia, and 266 million miles of personal travel in Virginia, and that equates to $84 million saved from reducing crash-related accidents, injuries, and deaths. Rail travel is better for air quality as well. As a result of our projects, we're looking at a 2.4 million ton reduction in CO2 emissions, and of course, relieving congestion. One passenger rail car equals 30 passenger vehicles approximately, and one freight rail car takes the place of 3.4 semi-trailer trucks. So we are saving money on annual pavement maintenance and congestion savings there as well. So lots of benefits coming from this program. And as we close, I just want to show you the layout of our rail plan. As I mentioned, it's a StoryMap format. So there is text that goes along with those maps that Bridget showed you. We look at existing conditions in Chapter 2 and enumerate the passenger rail improvements in Chapter 3, focus on freight rail improvements in Chapter 4, and look at the overall service and investment plan in Chapter 5 and the benefits of the projects listed. And then we do a summary of public involvement and coordination in Chapter 6. So I went a little bit over time here, a couple of minutes over time. Let me go to next steps, though, really quick before we get to Q&A. And we do expect to finalize the rail plan in November. The comment email will be open until October 27th. And so we'll be taking your comments until then and plan to address those in the rail plan or through the website. And then the Commonwealth Transportation Board is expected to vote on and adopt the plan in December, and along with the Federal Railroad Administration. So those are our next steps, but it doesn't end here. Obviously, we have Q&A period coming up, and I want to remind everybody that we are, Department of Rail and Public Transportation are constantly looking for opportunities. This rail plan is an ongoing process. We try to highlight trends at a moment in time and report on our projects at a moment in time, but we continue to carry on the mission and want to work with our partners to develop rail, both passenger and freight. So with that, I will open things up for questions. I see that there are some questions that have already come through, but I'm having a little bit of trouble reading them.
I will help with that, Emily. Sure.
Oh, thank you so much, Karen. So this is Karen Harrington from HBR, who's helping facilitate the Q&A.
Sure. And just as a reminder, we still have plenty of time for more questions, another 11 minutes or so. We have 4 questions so far, starting at the beginning. Will the presentation be shared after the meeting? I can go ahead and answer that. Absolutely. We will be posting the PowerPoint presentation to DRPT's website page for the State Rail Plan after the public meeting this evening. So by tomorrow, we should have that open, as well as including the links directly to the draft story map. Our next question, and this relates back to the first demo from Bridget on the existing rail network GIS data. Does this map differentiate between abandoned track and discontinued track? There is a distinct and important difference between the two. And I will turn that over to Bridget to start with that answer.
Sure, thanks, Karen. So currently on the map, the data does not distinguish between abandoned and discontinued, but I think that's certainly something in discussions with DRPC that can be added in the phases of the evolution of our GIS database development for the rail system. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Bridget. So this is Emily Stock again. It is an important distinction, and so since the last rail plan, DRPT has developed this GIS system that allows folks to go in through our website to see what rail infrastructure exists in Virginia. This is a first for us, and over the past few years, we first digitized the rail corridors, and we've gone in and gotten more detailed with the information that's there, and now we're populating it with projects. So this is new for us, and it's a step-by-step process. We will be consistently updating the GIS data and enhancing it. So that is definitely something that we want to do to enhance it, and I appreciate the comment.
Okay, our next question towards Emily. What is the status of the Long Bridge expansion?
So the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority is working on the Long Bridge expansion. And for those of you all who are not familiar, that is a 2-track bridge that goes over the Potomac River. It is one of the worst bottlenecks for freight and passenger rail in the Mid-Atlantic. And there are plans to double the size of that bridge and actually separate passenger and freight rail on the Long Bridge, and also add a pedestrian and bicycle bridge co-located with it. So the best source of information on exactly where that stands is Virginia Passenger Rail Authority's website. I know that it is still in the design phase. They did finish an environmental study, just like DRPT finished an environmental study for the DC to RVA corridor, and so they are working through design right now. But the VPRA website is the best source of information for the timing on that at this moment.
All right, next question. Will the story map be made available to the general public, and will there be a link provided? Yes, that will also be going out to the public tomorrow. It's still as draft review. So we are, any comments we're looking for, as you see on the screen still with the DRPT web email address. So those links will be embedded as well into the PowerPoint with some extra kind of screen captures showing some of those dashboards. So the public will be able to view those. Did you have anything else to add there, Emily?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. Next question. When, where will a PDF version of the draft rail plan be released? So I will attempt that answer as well. So the story map, as Emily and Bridget explained, will have all the text, and we actually will be basically converting a version of each of the chapters into a PDF that will be ADA accessible for screen readers as well. So that is forthcoming as we're still making some edits, as it's still draft. And so in a sense, those links to a PDF version will be basically built into the StoryMap that you should be able to click on. And Bridget and Emily, please correct me if I misrepresented that.
Yeah, that sounds right. Thank you. And real quick, just to follow up, I'm sorry I didn't know off the top of my head, but the Long Bridge, we went ahead and looked that up on the VPRA website. Its final design and construction is 2023 to 2030. So it's supposed to be complete by 2030, according to VPRA.
Okay, and the next question. In regards to out-of-service corridors, you may want to differentiate in the heat map from rail-banked versus privately owned versus pending STB, NITU approval, etc.
Okay, now that's really helpful, and I think that's a good distinction, especially as folks are looking to make the most of the rail infrastructure in Virginia that exists and transportation corridors. Thank you.
All right, that is the only that list of questions that have come in so far. We still have 5 minutes remaining. So if anybody has additional questions, please go ahead and enter those.
I'll give it another minute or so. Thanks again, everybody, for participating this morning. It looks like we've got participation from all over the place, from lots of different stakeholders. And just so you all know, we have over 200 people signed up for the public meeting at 6 p.m. So thanks for being guinea pigs this morning. Anybody else? Any other questions you see, Karen?
No, I haven't seen. Oh, just one more thank you. That's it.
Okay. Well, thanks, everybody. Thank you to Bridget and Karen for helping out and making this go smoothly, and also to our communications department at DRPT. Mary Olivia Rentner helped us put this together. Have a great day.